Now in part 2 of lecture 12, we're going to spend a half hour or so gazing mostly at a simple picture of 6 persimmons in a row. This contradicts all the rules about how to hold an audience for an illustrated lecture. The usual rule is keep the images changing, movement, striking imagery, frequent change. These are what we need. Well, and if those are the only things that will hold your attention, then you can skip over a lot of what comes next. On the other hand, if you want to hear a sincere attempt to deal with these big questions of what Chan painting really is, and even what Chan is, unanswerable questions, but still worth talking about, then stick with me for the next half hour or so. On the screen is the little painting of 6 persimmons, which we'll see a lot of this in this section. This used to be considered the ultimate non-analyzable, unintellectualizable painting. What can one possibly say about it? One can only sit in front of it, gazing at it in silent wonder, as if one were in Zen meditation. I want to use it, on the contrary, to say quite a lot. In fact, a lot of what I now feel is most worth saying about Chinese painting can be called up by confronting directly the issues raised, as I see it, by this simple little picture. And I believe that doing so will take us into just those issues that most concern me today. So, fasten your seatbelts, as Betty Davis says in the movie. Anyway, here we go. Now, this little picture can be taken to represent at its extreme the great confrontation that I've been talking about, alluding to, without really going into it very deeply. Between, on the one hand, the Chinese literati's bitter rejection of Muqi as a painter of coarse and ordinary subjects and styles that had no refinement, no brushwork, so that his paintings were fit only for hanging in monks' quarters, as they write, some of them write. And on the other hand, the reverence for this picture, the virtual worship of it by Japanese and some foreign Zen believers, those who want to mystify Chan painting into something beyond analysis. Now, I don't want to take either side, and I'll try to steer clear of both in talking about it. Some Yuan writers, to be sure, there are Yuan writers who have more positive things to say about Muqi. There's a book on plum painting, Shimada studied and published, Songjai Meipu, which just writes more positive about Muqi. But the effect on Muqi in China and the whole judgment of him over the centuries is very much as I have described it, and no less real. He was sort of wiped out there as far as the genuine paintings go. Okay, now, first of all, what would happen if we tried, against all the admonitions, to analyze this little picture stylistically and art historically even? Well, I used to do that in my classes, in fact, just to make this point. Now, what has the artist actually done? He has lined up 6 persimmons, obviously. That's easy. Yes, but far more than that. He varies them in size. The stems point in different directions, as you see. Their spacing is not simple after all, rather subtle. Slight overlappings sometimes. Much more than one notices at first, that is. And most effective is his skillful use of ink tonality, dark to light. Now, I used to show quite a few details from late Sung paintings, 13th century generally, composite images, more or less the same things lined up, to show how ink tonality was distributed within these, typically, tree groves and things like that. Well, here's one of them. Next, please. Put this beside the, we're going to have a series of things put beside the persimmons, compare and contrast. This is a painting in the Berkeley Art Museum, belongs to my daughter Sarah now, a painting of a bamboo grove that is probably by an artist named Tanjiro Rui, late 13th, early 14th century artist who was active in Zhejiang, known only in Japan from inscriptions and seals on paintings there, and very little known about him, completely forgotten in China. The painting, by the way, is reproduced in my Sogenga catalog, if you want to look at it. Now, the effect here is somewhat the same. That is, the artist has repeated more or less similar forms, more or less the same number, and put in the exact center the darkest in solid black. Then one that's a little bit lighter off to the side of that, then one still lighter, and then so on, going back. Okay, what is you can see that the two are similar in that respect. This is, I say, typical of 13th century things. I used to have other examples too. Now, what is the effect of this? It approximates optical experience, that is, concentrating the gaze on a central element of group, and the others are successively peripheral, going off to the sides. This device allows the eye to take in the group as a single image. Concentration, focus, in effect, like focus. It works very effectively in both cases, I think you will agree. Okay, let's go on. That's one aspect of it that I think is important, and an art historical, stylistic aspect of it. Now, the next, please. Here, this is quite a wonderful photograph. This is obviously a photograph. Here is 6 persimmons, right? This came from my old younger colleague friend, Yoshiaki Shimizu. He and I are brothers in the doctrine, so to speak, as he used to say, because we both studied the Shimada. Yoshi taught at UC Berkeley for a time, then moved to the East Coast, Freer Gallery, years of teaching at Princeton, now retired and living in Oregon. And he sent me this photograph along sort of to various people a few months ago, which he made for fun when the persimmons were ripe, and obviously alluding to Muqi's picture. Well, it's funny, but and perceptive in its way, but it also shows that why you can't just line up 6 persimmons and have a painting like Muqi's. That is, these don't even begin to command our attention the way the little painting is. Why? Because they're all alike, they're all lined up in a row, there's no focus, no unifying into a real composition, no difference in tonality and so forth. Well, he didn't expect that. I'm not criticizing it, I'm saying he makes this point. But it's useful for making that point. Okay, going on. Here's another comparable thing, and equally sort of pointless, really. This is from a hand scroll I'll talk about later. A hand scroll of copies, probably, almost certainly copies after a work by Muqi. And these copyists here, well, he makes them all uniform, first of all, and then he makes 11 of them, thinking, well, if 6 is good, then 11 is better, or maybe the original had 11 persimmons, I don't know. At any rate, it doesn't work. It's dull, repetitive, and so on. But putting these two together, I should make the point, you know, there are fairy tales in which the dull brother ends up entering the palace at the end, marrying the princess. Well, this is something like that. What if this painting were to end up entering the emperor's palace, as in fact is what happens? And we need to put the persimmons in a wider context to understand just how this happened. Okay, here we go. Now, beside the persimmons, now I put a small painting of chestnuts. Both of them are in one of the Daitokuji Zen temples, one of the sub-temples called the Juko-en. Very famous there, revered, in fact, as Zen paintings. I don't have a good slide of the chestnuts. This is from an old photograph, old slide. You can see that it has something in common. You can still see that the middle right leaf is the darkest and the other somewhat lighter, as you can see. Well, as I say, I won't talk about that because I don't have a good slide. I'll show others. But both of them were very probably, we now believe, cut from a hand scroll, like the ones that were copied in the 2 copies, but cut in Japan from hand scrolls for tea ceremony use, hanging in the tokonoma for gazing at. The Japanese, they used hand scrolls, of course, the great emaki for narrative and so on. But they were not very happy with hand scrolls that you simply looked at to appreciate. So they would cut them up and mount them. Now, here, to make that point further, here are 2 more, next please, side by side. Let's skip the persimmons just for a moment. These two representing, as you see, cabbage and a kind of radish, or turnip anyway. Vegetables. Muqi is known to have painted pictures of this kind. It's one of the things that the writers on Muqi say about him. They list the subjects he did, and among them are vegetables, sort of low-life, commonplace subjects. Well, okay. Did these come from a hand scroll? Well, immediately when you ask a question like that, you look to see if there are breaks or folds or whatever on the silk. And in this case, paper. A little bit different, but still. Actually, as far as I can see, and I don't remember seeing the originals, I may have once, there's only a kind of fold mark in this very center, vertical. That means they may originally have been album leaves. It's quite possible that Muqi would have done albums of this kind with pictures as well as hand scrolls. You can see clearly here that someone, the mounter, has put paper, added paper up above. Everything above a certain point in each picture is new paper. Whether the writing on them is Muqi's writing or somebody else, people who are good in calligraphy, you'll have to have an opinion on, comparing them with other writing by Muqi on his bigger paintings, which we've seen. Anyway, I'm not taking a stand on that. I had myself dismissed these two as not by Muqi in my old index, but now I'm more inclined to see them as maybe taken from a real Muqi hand scroll or album. Okay, now going on again. Here, let's put these beside or under them, underneath, let's say, two long sections of one of the two hand scrolls I spoke about. These are hand scrolls probably copied after Muqi's works, made up of paintings of vegetables, plants, birds, and so on, miscellaneous subjects. They're in Chinese collections, one of them in the Palace Museum in Taipei, and the other in the Palace Museum in Beijing. So, I have an article titled Continuations of Chuan Painting into Mingqing and the Prevalence of Type Images, and it's in the Archives of Asian Art, number 50, 1997 to 98. So if you want to read it, it's there, and one of these paintings copies is reproduced and discussed in it. The copies are probably from the Yuan dynasty, maybe early Ming, 14th century, let's say. We don't know who did them, and this, what I'm showing, is from the Taipei scroll. I don't have good slides of the Beijing one. The Beijing scroll has a colophon by the important Ming artist Shenzhou, famous artist, who copied parts of it, and I reproduced parts of his copies in my article. Shenzhou seems to have admired it, and in fact other famous painters of the Ming did also, and copied parts of it. Chen Shun, or Chen Daofu, Xu Wei, great master. All these reproduced and talked about in my article. And it ends with, well, let me speak of that in just a minute. The next, let's see. Yes, here's a slide. Here's the entire scroll reproduced together. This is the Taipei scroll, as I say. It begins up at the top with a flower, which we'll see in a bit, rose mallow, some call it. And then a whole series of flowers, persimmons, something like Asian pears at the far left of the first stop. Then down below, persimmons, and vegetables, and so forth, green onions, and at the left of next to the bottom, two birds, shrikes, on a mound of land. These, I say, are all copies, and then it ends with, well, a bird in flight and a larger thing of land with more birds on it, pheasants. Okay, and then the signature of Muqi at the end, copied. Okay, next please. Here's the shrike, one of them from that scroll, a detail. And beside it, I'll put a painting attributed to Muqi, famous one. I don't have a good slide of it. This is made from a reproduction in Seren's book. This is Seren 3, volume 3, page number 343. At any rate, this painting is quite famous in Japan and owned maybe still is, owned when I first saw it by the dealer Setsu in Tokyo. This has a Muqi seal on it. It may really be his work. And this 17th century individualist master, Bada Shanran, or Juda, did paintings quite similar to this, which indicates that somehow this design was transmitted to him. In paintings, I was arguing, maybe transmitted in Buddhist monasteries. It could be that real Muqis were transmitted in China in the Buddhist temples or monasteries. We don't know much about their collections, and in any case, most of them didn't survive into modern times. Cultural Revolution, among other things, finished off some of them. Okay, at any rate, for the account of how all of this happened and how these paintings were received and copied by Ming artists, see my article in Archives of Asian Art for 1997-98, which ends, I say, by showing how the great individualist master Bada Shanran received them. And he himself was an artist who broke the rules and made new and exciting imagery out of them. That's the point that I end with. That's another story, however. Well, at any rate, the people who, mostly in China, the artists who were doing these, copying these, could not see genuine Muqi paintings without traveling to Japan, because none of them they were not surviving in accessible collections in China, say. Possibly still to be seen in Shan monasteries. I don't know the answer to that. Now, anyway, this is what happened to Muqi. He was cleaned up, transformed into neat brushwork, into expressions of expressively mild forms. Now let's go on. Here's a painting of the flowers, some variously called hibiscus and rose mallow. These are from the Taipei scroll again. Well, the copy on the left and the original, also in Japan, may be cut from an original Muqi hand scroll on the right. Well, the copy, as you see, is all done in orthodox and quite controlled brushwork, brush strokes, and or with orthodox limits on ink tonality, and it doesn't have the kind of rough brush stuff that the other does. What seems to me the real one follows the kind of what form that I've talked about of having a dark, you see the dark leaf in the center and lighter leaves going out, and you see scratchy, nasty brushwork here and there, and you see a lot of puddling, interesting puddling, and all kinds of interesting, not brushwork, because there isn't any brushwork really, but ways of putting ink on paper to represent and make it an exciting image out of this flower. Well, okay, what you see on the left then is what was done to Muqi. He was cleaned up, he was transformed into neat brushwork into sets of expressively mild forms that one could roll past and not be confronted by, as the Japanese viewer is confronted by the Persimmons and the others in the tea ceremony hanging scrolls as they've been made. The Persimmons, that is, sort of gaze out at us almost as insistently as Muqi's Mother Gibbon gazes out at us, almost as insistently. In other words, Muqi was preserved in China by being robbed of everything that gave his images their power, his teeth pulled, so to speak. And through that, he was able to move from the despised monk's hut where he was originally consigned to the imperial palace, like at the end of the fairy tale, as I said. These two hand scrolls went through distinguished collections, and as you can see at the right of the copy here, imperial seals, but also seals of Shang Anbian, great 16th century collector. Deng Qichang served in his household for a time and saw his collection and so on. And then these two went into the palace, much appreciated, much copied, while the real Muqi, banished from China, survives only in Japan. Okay, I've made my point. Now back to the Persimmons, and let me elaborate more. Now, while you just gaze at them, if I make you gaze at them for half an hour, that's good. I hope. patience. And so I can elaborate further on the implications of this matter and consider for a moment what we mean or what we think we mean by talking about Chan painting. What I've shown up to now in paintings by Muqi and other Chan-related artists have mostly been relatable to the Chan sect by subject. Chan masters, Chan images of Chan adherents, and the Guanyin and so forth. Not this. There's no way this can be called a Chan subject. And I used to ask to my students when I brought up this kind of matter, in what ways can we relate a system of philosophy or a religious sect to a body of paintings? And I would go through them, moving from the simplest to the most direct, well, they include, for instance, starting from the most direct, paintings can represent events in the history of that sect or people who are involved in it. That's the easy way. That's straightforward. Paintings can have been used in rituals or otherwise within the sect, like Buddhist icons. That's fairly straightforward. Paintings can be documented as having been done by masters of that sect, which number of them are that. They can bear inscriptions indicating how they were owned and appreciated by adherents of that sect. Now, all these are relatively straightforward, but what if we go beyond these? There are paintings in Japan that are considered Zen paintings, and people will be shocked if you question that, and yet they don't belong to any of these categories. What about them? What if the Muqi authorship of the Persimmons were removed from the little picture? Would that take away its status as a Zen painting? Well, the answer, I hope, is no. And yet to question its status as a Zen painting would be almost sacrilegious. In what sense, then, is it Zen? Please understand that what I'm talking about here are art historical interpretations, not historical facts. It's easy to make counter-arguments if one wants to, and probably people will. Okay. They won't invalidate what I'm saying because I say these are formulations, they're arguments, they're something else. Okay, here we go again. Now this is an image that certainly has qualities of the enigmatic, even the profound, and yet it depicts something that is ordinary, mundane, Persimmons. The simplification, first of all, which makes for immediacy, the formal means that I showed, ink tonality and spacing and so on, that unite the Persimmons into a single image that I showed. The effect of this is that the image registers immediately on the mind of the viewer. There's no intermediate process of analysis and synthesis. Also, there's no reference to anything else in style and brushwork or whatever. There's no multi-level response. You know, like here is a rock, here is a Li Tong rock, here is a rock done in this kind of distinctive brushwork, and so on. The Persimmons has none of these. It has no style. In that sense, it's sort of like what Lur said in praise of the little landscape by Xiaogui, which I showed in the previous lecture, as the highest praise one could have for a painting. I'm absolutely with him on that. Now, I want to mention an article, long forgotten, important in its way, I think, by a scholar, Chinese painting and philosophy scholar, named Victoria Kontag, German. She was in China during the 1940s. She wrote a famous seal book on collector's seals, along with C.C. Wang. Anyway, she was famous for her writings, but she was a very mysterious and difficult woman. Her writing is extremely difficult. She never made it in academia because she couldn't give lectures that anybody could understand, really. Anyway, she wrote an article. The title translated is The Unique Characteristics of Chinese Landscape Painting, and it appeared in the Archives of Chinese Art, as it was then, later Asian Art, Archives number 6 for 1951. It was translated with great difficulty by Larry Sickman. He told me once that it took him a week to do it and a lot of work. Her German is very difficult indeed, and the article itself is pretty difficult. At any rate, if you're seriously interested, find it and read it. Archives number 6 for 1951. Now, from memory, I haven't seen it and read it for decades, but just from memory, Victoria Kontag in this article makes a parallel between the Confucian theory of knowledge, by which the bewildering diversity of real, visual, and other sensory experience of the world needs to be organized, reduced to a system in order to be manageable, since the human mind can make sense of the world only by recognizing recurring patterns and forms and relating the raw materials of perception to this. And, on the other hand, the formulation of literati painting styles, which does something comparable for landscape painting. That is, it sets up a system of brushwork, of forms, of compositions that makes it controlled and orderly. The outcome of that process is best exemplified in the orthodox school of landscape that follows Dongqi Chang in the 16th into the 17th century. That is, the landscape subject, the image, the picture, becomes unimportant, repetitive. Nobody cares, nobody, is very interested in the picture. One can't really appreciate them as pictures. C.C. Wang used to tell me this over and over and show me. And yet the appreciation of these orthodox school landscapes was the very basis of connoisseurship in modern China, the circle of Wu Fan from which C.C. Wang and Xu Bangda came. They studied how to appreciate and value and distinguish genuine from fake and so forth in orthodox school landscape. And in fact, Wu Fan and C.C. Wang in his early work are kind of continue that tradition. Well, as I hardly need to say, this is not the kind of connoisseurship that was acceptable to me. I learned it up to a point, never as far as C.C. Wang, of course. But in my lyric journey book, for instance, I compared the repetitive orthodox school landscapes of this kind to Japanese tea scoops, the little bamboo sticks that you scoop up the tea with in the tea ceremony, because they are very similar. They can hardly be told apart by the amateur, the outsider. And yet the connoisseurship of them is supposed to be very esoteric and very high level. And my argument was the fact they were harder to appreciate doesn't mean that they represent a higher taste. Okay, anyway, that's my belief. In this Confucian approach to knowledge, as is defined by Kontag, visual phenomena pass through a kind of organizing and categorizing process, like data through a machine, and are given an intellectual overlay. The image in painting can be correspondingly overlaid with symbolism, can be made to evoke echoes of poetry or history, or whatever it may be in the mind of the viewer. The artist, that is, necessarily does this by providing cues, including elements of style and imagery that refer to something already there in the viewer's mind and call up these references. The complexity of painting earlier in the Song, literati painting especially, painting by some of the artists such as Zhao Lingrong and Huang Shan. Admiration for brushwork, admiration for old styles, for execution, the symbolism of the subject, personal styles, all of that, the use of conventional images, poetic references. All of these were interposed between the image and the viewer in a sense, or can be regarded that way, or imposed on the subject, if you think of it that way. Even the poetic quality of a lot of Southern Song court painting means that the subject was used for a kind of literary artistic purpose. The artist, that is, not only presents the image, but tries to determine, or at least structure, your response to it. At worst, he tells you what you should feel about the subject. Well, in other words, this is a fine painting because it follows all the rules, and the rules that we agreed on, or we have collectively agreed on. And that eventually leads to dullness in the Orthodox school in the later part. The Orthodox school starts out exciting and fine with Dongqi Chang and especially Wang Yuanqi, and then it trails off into repetitive, the same thing over and over. Okay. Now, in any case, seeing this way, the way the Confucian theory of knowledge and so on, as defined by Kontag, is completely antipathetic to Zen, which does not confront the mind with formalized experience. Quite the opposite. Zen apprehension of the world is not a matter of confrontation of a viewer versus a viewed, with the barrier of intellection and thinking about it in between. In Zen, in theory, and I say this, I'm not exactly a I don't think I ever achieved satori, so I don't claim it. This is my understanding. In Zen, the viewer and the viewed are parts of a continuum or a field in which individualization in the sense of a separate entity opposing itself to the rest of the world doesn't exist. Somehow you've gone beyond that, outside that. Chan artists similarly try to cut through all this overlay of styles, literary references, all the rest of it, and to present direct, unmediated perception of the object without the intrusion of the artist or the style and so on. When writers on Zen speak about Zen artists identifying with their subjects, this is what they're getting at, I suppose. And have we achieved that in some kind of, I hope, move towards Zen enlightenment by gazing at this little picture for all this long time? Well, doing this, needless to say, made Chan or Zen painting quite unacceptable to most Confucian literati critics who scorned it and talked about vulgar subjects and coarse execution and all the rest of it, and collectively saw to it that it wasn't preserved, except to our great good fortune in Japan. I started out saying that following up all the different ways of discussing the 6 Persimmons could lead to the biggest issues that I'm confronting now, or that are confronting me in this late period of my life. And I'll venture further into that dangerous big area after looking at some landscapes ascribed to Muqi and another Chan master, Yu, which represent the proper end to this series as a treatment of great early history of Chinese painting, especially landscape, since they represent the final triumph of ink monochrome landscape in the Sung dynasty.